Hey everyone and welcome back. So in today's video we'll learn on how we can join the Consul clients. Now whenever you start Consul with the development server mode, it automatically assumes the leadership of the cluster. Now this is one of the important points that we'll be discussing in great detail. However, do note that if you look into this specific diagram, specifically in terms of high availability, here you see that there are multiple Consul agent that are running in the server mode, and within here you have one server that has assumed the leadership role. So here you see you have the leader which is written and the other server has a follower that is written. So that is what is referred by the first point. Since you only have one server here, whenever you are running into the dev server mode, it automatically assumes the leadership of the cluster. Now, one more advantage of the Consul dev server mode is that it is useful for quickly starting the Consul agent with all the persistence option turned off. So we have seen that if we just do a Control C and start the Consul agent again, all of the data is removed. Also note that it is based on a in-memory based approach which is required for rapid prototyping or developing purposes. Now, assuming that you already have a Consul server that is up and running, the next step is on how we can go ahead and join a Consul client to the server. So in order to join the client to the server, you need to run the following command. So let's look into the command here. So the command is Consul agent join followed by the IP address. So this IP address that you see over here, this is the IP address of the server. So here the IP address of the server is 1.2.3.4 and this is what you are adding over here. Then you have specified bind, and within bind you are specifying 5678. Again, this is the IP address and this is the IP address of the client. And then you specify the data dir where you have to specify the path where the information will be stored by the client. So let's do one thing. We'll be discussing in great detail about each one of this step by step. But first, let's quickly do the practical so that the overall concept on how we can join a client to the cluster is understood. Now for today's demo, we also have one more server called as Consul02 that is up and running. So basically we already have a server that is up. However, we also need one more server with Consul installed, and this server is where we'll go ahead and configure the Consul client. So the prerequisite for today's video is that you need to have one more server with the Consul installed here. Now one more important part to remember here, let me quickly show you, is the firewall. Now since the Consul server as well as the Consul client will be intercommunicating between each other, it is important that your firewall does not block. So within the Consul server firewall that we have created, along with the IP address of my ISP so that I can connect, I have also added the IP address or basically the name associated with the Consul 01 as well as the Consul 02. So if you're doing AWS, you can add the IP address of the EC2 instances. Now in case if you're using DigitalOcean, let me quickly show you on how you can do that. So instead of adding the IP address of Consul 01 or Consul 02, you can directly add by the name. So let's say Consul, and it will automatically populate here, and all you have to do is you have to click on save. Alright, so this is the basic prerequisite for today's video. So within my SSH client, I am already connected to both of them. Within the Consul 01, which is going to act as a server, let's go ahead and start the Consul agent in dev mode. So let's say Consul agent dev and the client will say 0000. Alright, so our server is up and running. So at this stage, since our Consul server is up and running, from the client we have to run this command so that it can join the existing cluster. Now for our easy reference, I have already added this command to the document that you can find in GitHub as well. So let's quickly modify this command. So let me just copy this up. Now the first flag is the join one where you have to specify the IP address of the Consul server. So since Consul server is running in Consul 01, let's copy the IP address of this instance and I'll paste it. And then you also have the bind, and within the bind you have to specify the IP address of the agent. So our Consul client agent is going to run in Consul 02 server. So let me copy that IP and replace it over here. And within the data directory, let's call it as root Consul. Now we'll be discussing these things in great detail, but first let's quickly go ahead and connect our client here. So within our client, let's go ahead and paste this command and let's see on what happens here. So if you'll see, it exited with a code of 1, and here you basically get the exact error message, and the error message is failed to join this IP address which belongs to the Consul server, and it is saying connection refused. So let's quickly look into why this happens. So connecting to the Consul 01 server, if you quickly do a netstat-ntlp command, here you see that the 8500, which is specifically used for GUI and other communication, is open for all. However, there are certain ports like 8300, 8301, 8302, which again belongs to Consul, but they are associated with 127001, which is the loopback address. And this is one of the reasons why the client is not able to establish the connection with the server. So what we need to do is we also have to make the Consul listen on 8300 and other ports over the generic address. So in order to do that, let's quickly do a Control C and we'll specify a bind option. And within the bind, you have to specify the IP address of the Consul 01 server, which is the current server where you are running this command. So let's copy the IP. Great. So now if you quickly do a netstat-ntlp, now you will see that instead of 127001, it is listening on this specific IP address. Now if I quickly have to show you in great detail, if I do a ifconfig here, the ETH0 is associated with the public IP. Now again, if you're doing it in AWS, it would be associated with a private IP here. However, in DigitalOcean, it is associated with the public IP, and our Consul server is now listening for the cluster related communication on this specific IP address. So earlier our client was not able to connect on this IP. However, now if we try to run this command again, you see it is working perfectly well. So now if you look into the node, you have two nodes, you have Consul 01 and Consul 02. And if I quickly refresh, you will now see that the Consul 01 has the leader associated with it, and you have a Consul 02, which is just a client here. Great. So I hope you understood at a high level overview on how a client can be connected to the server. Now, in fact, let me quickly show you a few more interesting things here. Now, within the Consul 01, where our agent is running on dev, let me quickly do a Control C and our Consul server has stopped running. Now, if you look into the Consul 02, you immediately within the logs, you basically get a message stating that it is attempting to reconnect to Consul 01 primarily because it is not able to establish the existing connection. So here you see it has failed the overall act. So it has not received the acknowledgement from the Consul server. Now, let's go ahead and start the dev mode yet again. And now within the log of the Consul client, note that it is attempting to reconnect here. And after few seconds, things have been working perfectly well and it has synced the node info. So if you quickly refresh over here, you see you have both the Consul 01 as well as the Consul 02. So if the Consul server goes down, then the Consul client has the capability to go ahead and reconnect back once the server is up. Great. So now let's go ahead and discuss more in detail about the flag of join, bind and data dir. So the first one is join. So join is basically the address of another agent to join upon starting up. Now, since within our cluster we only have one node that was existing prior to the Consul 02, we had given the IP address of that specific node over here. So in this case, this is the IP address of the Consul server. Second is the bind flag, which is basically an IP address that should be reachable by all other nodes in the cluster. So for example, let's say that the client can only connect to the server on the IP address of 1234. Then whenever you're configuring, you have to specify a bind of 5.6.7.8 for the client and 1.2.3.4 for the server. So if you remember here, for the console client, let's go a bit up, we had specified the IP address of the console client over here. However, when we were running the console agent in dev, in the bind we had specified the IP address of this server, which is basically the public IP, so that other agent can go ahead and communicate on this specific IP address. So that is the basics of join and basics of bind. You also have another flag called as data.dir. So this is required for all of the agent. So this is the directory that should be durable across reboot, and it is also used for storing the overall cluster state. Now at this stage, since we are running the console in the dev mode and the persistence is not enabled, so that's the reason why you do not really have to specify the data.dir. However, whenever you are running in a server mode, which is not the development one, then you will have to specify the data.dir there as well. We'll be discussing about that as well step by step, but as of now, at a high level overview, I hope you understood what each one of this mean. Now one more important thing that I wanted to show you, let's do a Control C over here. So if I remove a bind, so basically if I remove a bind, immediately it gives a message stating that multiple IPv4 address is found. And this is the reason why it is asking us to explicitly set a bind flag. So if I quickly do a ifconfig here, you see that there are multiple interfaces that are associated with it. So it is important, if you have multiple interface, to specifically add a bind flag so that the cluster knows on which IP the communication should happen, whether it should happen via this IP or whether it should happen via this IP and so on. So that is one part. Second part is, if you remove this data.dir and if you try to start the agent, it immediately gives an error stating that the data.dir cannot be empty. So now if you look into the description of data.dir, it states that this is required for all of the agent. Great. So I hope at a high level overview you understood the basics on how we can join the console client along with some of the important flag in today's video.